Ahoy, and welcome to this very special episode of the Blizzard podcast, sharing stories from the RRS Research Ship Discovery here in Dundee. I'm Kim, and Julie's here with me. Hello. And we work at Dundee Heritage Trust, and we're the hosts of the Blizzard podcast, home to all the extra bits from Discovery Point in the wonderful city of Dundee. If you've been in the city and near the waterfront, you've probably seen and likely heard the work that's been occurring on the ship over the last 18 months. And while it's been quite noisy at times, what's been happening beneath the canopy has sometimes been hidden from view. So we're here today to peek behind the doors and under the covers of the work that's been going on in an audio adventure aboard the Royal Research Ship Discovery.
So to start our tour, we are stood on the quayside down at the city's waterfront. What you can see on the quayside here at RRS Discovery is now the rudder and the cuddies that had come off of the stern of the ship. We lifted the rudder and the cuddies from the ship right at the very start of the works in the summer of 2024. It was done due to the unique shape of the ship. Most ships are like what we would draw as children, like a capital D rolled onto its tummy. But the Discovery is different. It has an overhang at the stern, which is the back of the ship. This is similar to some ships designed for whaling vessels, as it allowed the rudder and the propeller to be lifted to stop them being frozen in the ice and potentially breaking, which would be a fatal occurrence when you're the only ship in the area.
This smart bit of engineering, however, has caused some issues when it came to the beginning of the capital work. As we put the ship into dry dock to assess the work that needed doing, the stern was no longer supported by the water and was slowly pulling away from the rest of the ship. This issue was highlighted by the LiDAR and photogrammetry scans that were done by the University of Southampton as part of the Tales of Discovery project, and perhaps set in motion the work quite quickly.
So in order to slow down this effect, it was decided to remove some of the objects causing the most weight. The ship's wheel, the two cuddies, which were the toilets, and the rudder. For the cuddies and the rudder, a crane was brought in, and carefully, slowly, these were lifted onto the quayside in what was a very exciting summer's day back in 2024. The sound of winches filled the air. Back in 1901, they wouldn't have had the cranes that we did. They would have had to use rope, masts and pulley systems to hoist them up to safety, with a spare propeller and rudder tucked away in storage, just in case there were any mishap. You can see the rudder on the quayside, so now is a great time to come and see it, touch it and get up close. Shall we hop on board?
Let's go. On the decks, you can see one of the most important and visible changes. Every inch of the deck has been recorked. But before you can recork, you have to decork, meticulously removing the existing material that's found between the beams of the deck. It's a slow process and requires a really steady hand, and it sounds a bit like this. Some of the cork that we pulled out from between the planks, we think maybe dates back to at least the 1920s, possibly even older. We've sent some of it away to our friends at the University of Southampton, and they're going to run some tests and see just how old some of the stuff that was left in there was.
Wow, it's amazing, isn't it?
So cool.
So for anybody that doesn't know, caulking is a process of making the decks and the hulls waterproof by hammering in oakum, which is twisted jute or hemp fibres, tightly into the gaps between the planks that you find on the deck of a ship. Once you've done that, you cover it with a mixture of tar and marine glue, which you have to melt down and then leave it to set again. And that whole process sounds a little bit like this.
And we're super lucky to have a ready supply of jute in our sister museum at Verdant Works. There are wonderful volunteers who have been running jute through the softener, twisting and adjusting the settings to get the right texture and consistency for the task, taking feedback from the crew on what was working and what wasn't. If you've ever been to Verdant Works, you'll recognise the rumble of our softener machine. It's great that our sites can work together in tandem. They often feel quite separate in terms of the types of stories that we tell and the collections that they hold, but it's a really great reminder on how integral Dundee's shipbuilding heritage and jeep manufacturing were to each other and how intertwined they were for decades.
I suppose when we're talking about the shipbuilding heritage, another really interesting story from where we're stood on the deck just now of Discovery is that when we've been caulking and things, we've been seeing some deck planks that have been needing wee bits of repair and things like that. So we've had to restore certain areas. To do that, we needed new wood. But when we say new, we probably don't really mean new. The teak that we're using to restore the decks come from the SS Pegu, a ship that was sunk in 1917 in the First World War, which was carrying a cargo of Burmese teak. This teak was brought up in 2011 from the bottom of the seafloor for two main reasons. Due to climate change, trees now grow faster, which results in weaker wood than what would have been used in the past. And the second reason is that teak of this kind is now really heavily regulated, and therefore it's just very expensive. Using this rare heritage teak allows us to replace like for like in the ship and retain accuracy during the restoration process. Pegu teak has also been used in the restoration of another Scottish-built ship, the Cutty Sark, and smaller quantities have been used to make guitars and a drum as well.
Speaking of interesting connections, as we head down into the sail locker, we can see where some of the less obvious but critical work has been going on. Here we are, steam bending and laminating oak up to 90mm thick to form a curved support for that overhanging stern that we were talking about earlier, and reinforcing the main support beam. Some of this shaping has been done off-site in a timber yard, but some of it is so large that it can only be done on-site.
To get to this stage, we've been investigating and restoring wood using hand tools and electric machines. It's quite a noisy process, as you'll hear.
Most of what we found have been timbers from the 1920s refit before the oceanographic expedition, but we've also found timber and caulking, like I mentioned, that we believe might be from 1901. It's wholly possible that these would have been touched and shaped by a man who's nearly unknown today, but possibly knew the Discovery ship better than Scott himself.
And that man was James Duncan, who was a shipwright living in Dundee and working for the Dundee Shipbuilding Company. He worked on building Discovery from the keel up in 1900, and when it came to selecting a shipwright, he jumped at the chance, joining the Merchant Navy and setting off into the great beyond, leaving behind a wife and a young family, including a 5-month-old daughter.
How terrifying.
I know, especially when you think about people in Dundee at that time wouldn't have been travelling.
Yeah, I don't think he'd have left the surrounding counties in the slightest. Such an adventure to go on.
Amazing adventure. When James was in Antarctica, his role was not only to make sure that the ship was safe and warm for the crew and the officers that were there, but also to ensure that the huts that were built were safe and the sledges that went on the expeditions with the men could sustain the weight and long distances. He was very good at building sledges because on the sports day he built a sledge that was too good and he ended up just flying. We know a lot about James Duncan's adventures through his diary, which follows daily life of the crew on board the ship from New Zealand to his return home in 1903.
Heading back up to the decks, we're now near the bow of the ship. And looking up, we can see rigging, though not nearly as much as there would have been in 1901. Each rope would have done a critical job, holding sails in place and supporting the men as they climb the mast to do care and maintenance every single day.
And now we use the amazing TS rigging, who were about earlier this summer to blacken the ropes, which is a process that stops the ropes from getting damaged by UV light from the sun and degrading. It's just one of the regular maintenance tasks that is required to keep the ship going by a specialist tradesman who keep intangible skills alive. I'll pass you over to Tom from TS Rigging now, who'll tell us a little bit more about what they got up to when they were here in summer 2025.
We've done some repairs to the spars, specifically the jibboom, which is out on the front of the ship, and some of the work on the tops platforms on the main mast. We've been replacing ropes for access, and we've been doing a lot of blacking, which is tarring the natural fibres and the wires to keep the weather out.
All of the crew would have been familiar with climbing the rigging, even the officers, though maybe less so the civilian scientists.
I'm pretty sure Edward Wilson would have climbed up there to get a bed every once or twice.
And there's an absolutely classic photo of the ship leaving Lyttelton in New Zealand just before Christmas in 1901, and you can see the men waving back to shore from the decks, from the bridge, from the ropes, and from the crow's nest. And above it, clinging to the very top of the mast, is Charles Bonner, and moments later he would tragically fall from that very spot to his death. Something that would put a dampener on the celebrations of them leaving and ready to go onto the thing that they'd come halfway across the world to do. Bonner himself was a gregarious, well-loved and popular man on board, and the timing of it being just before Christmas and at the start of such an exciting adventure was really horrible for the crew. He was honoured with a naval burial and was remembered by the crew throughout the expedition, especially around Christmas time. But it just goes to show how much we rely on good health and safety practice whilst we're doing all of this work.
We're disembarking now, peering down into the dry dock, and we can see scaffolding and some exploratory holes peeking into the skeleton of the ship. This is all preparatory work for Phase 2, which will include steam bending work to the keel, some work to the stanchions, the bulwarks, and building a custom cradle that will support the ship in dry dock, meaning that we shouldn't have to undergo such extensive work for another 100 years. So I used a lot of big ship words there, or not even big ship words, but just ship words. A keel is the ship's backbone, so it's its central longitudinal structure beam that is running along the bottom of the hull from the bow to the stern. So that is, is a really critical point of the ship. So a bulwark is the part of the ship that's on the upper deck that's a bit like a solid railing that stops you from going over the side. And the stanchions are what support this kind of railing system. So they're the upright posts that support the bulwarks. This work has, of course, needed a great deal of funding, and we're incredibly thankful to the National Heritage Memorial Fund, the National Watery Heritage Fund, the Tay Cities Region Deal, and others. As a charity, we will continue to need funding for ongoing maintenance and the skills development of our staff and volunteers so that we can continue to care for this Dundee icon.
I think we should head into the warm now. But before we go, if you've enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more from behind the scenes and deep dives, there are 6 episodes in our first series, including episodes on unsung heroes like Tom Crean, polar authors, and local connections to some famous faces. And stay tuned, or subscribe, I guess, for the rest of series 2, where we'll be doing even more deep dives, chats with experts, and once again, taking you behind the scenes. And if you'd like to come and see the works up close for yourself, the ship is still open while this is all going on, so it's a really exciting opportunity to be able to see traditional heritage engineering in action, basically, and to see Discovery as you've never seen it before, and see what we're uncovering as we begin to peel back the layers of her historic timbers. And chat to them as well.
Yeah.
They're always up for a chat.
They are indeed. So I think from both of us, thank you very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this little audio tour through the ship and the restoration project.
See you for the rest of series 2.
See you soon.
Bye.